1957's 12 Angry Men is considered, after To Kill a Mockingbird, to be one of the greatest courtroom films of all time. I would say it's better, personally. The story started off as a 1954 teleplay for a show called Studio One, written by Reginald Rose. The next year it was turned into a stage play. Actor Henry Fonda apparently saw a production of the play and wanted to star as the lead character, juror number 8.
Oh, what are we doing now?
I guess we talk.
Fonda reached out to Rose and the two would produce the film. Director Sidney Lumet was recruited by Rose and Fonda in what would be his directorial debut and the first of his 4 Best Director Oscar nominations. In less than a month and with a budget of $337,000, adjusted for inflation that is roughly just over $4 million, they created a film that I find myself returning to constantly in times of just ennui about the criminal justice system, which I have been feeling a lot recently.
What gets me is the way those lawyers talk and talk and talk, even when it's an open and shut case like this one. I mean, did you ever hear so much talk about nothing?
12 Angry Men takes place in a New York County courthouse on a hot day where a trial has just wrapped up. An 18-year-old boy who is called a slum kid is accused of killing his father. The judge instructs the jury that if the boy is found guilty unanimously, the boy will be sent to death via the electric chair.
One man is dead. Another man's life is at stake. If there's a reasonable doubt in your minds as to the guilt of the accused, a reasonable doubt, then you must bring me a verdict of not guilty.
The death penalty was legal in New York at the time. It is currently not, except in the case of federal crimes. Because of the heat and the clear-cut presentation of the prosecution, there's a desire from the majority of the jurors to get the whole thing over with. When the first vote is cast, all the jurors vote guilty except juror number 8.
Now we know where we are. Boy, oh boy, there's always one.
You really think he's innocent?
I don't know.
He believes that there is reasonable doubt and there should be more discussion about the evidence in the case. Each of the men then reiterate the evidence in the case: a knife that the kid said fell out of his pocket but is decided to be the murder weapon, 2 pieces of eyewitness evidence, and the circumstantial fact that he could not remember the movie that he went to or the names of the people that were starring in it that is supposed to be his alibi. And despite what basic instinct has told you, an alibi actually means like where you would have been if not at the scene of the crime.
I'd have to be pretty stupid to write a book about killing and then kill somebody the way I described it in my book. I'd be announcing myself as the killer. I'm not stupid.
We know you're not stupid, Miss Trammell.
Maybe that's what you're counting on to get you off the hook.
Writing the book gives you an alibi.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
That's not how the Force works.
The first crack in this comes when juror number 8 reveals that although the person who sold the kid the knife says that he's never seen another one like it, juror number 8 was able to find an exact duplicate.
Where did that come from? It's the same knife.
Now this is the moment where I would like to pause and say that the events of this movie should not be taken as 100% legal. It is a movie and a play that has a narrative agenda, so things happen that are in line with that. So just keep in mind that you cannot, if you are called to a jury, just go out and find a random knife. Juror number 8 never says that he thinks the kid is innocent. He expresses that there is reasonable doubt, and if they are going to put a teenager to death, they shouldn't rush the process.
This kid's been kicked around all of his life. You know, born in a slum, mother dead since he was 9. He lived for a year and a half in an orphanage when his father was serving a jail term for forgery. He's had a pretty miserable 18 years. I just think we owe him a few words, that's all.
I don't mind telling you this, mister. We don't owe him a thing.
Through dialogue, the movie is able to address the biases that all of the men have brought to the case. Juror number 3 has a complicated relationship with his son and takes that out on the kid by proxy.
When he was 9 years old, he ran away from a fight. I saw it. I was so embarrassed I almost threw up. I said, I'm going to make a man out of you if I have to break you in 2 trying. I haven't seen him for 2 years.
Juror number 7 just doesn't care because he has Yankee tickets and he wants to go to the game.
Yeah, we can all get out of here pretty quick, huh? I don't know about the rest of you, but I happen to have tickets to that ball game tonight.
Yanks in Cleveland.
Juror number 10 is a xenophobic bigot who gets a big monologue about how people from the slums are like that, which does eventually isolate him from the other members of the jury.
They don't need any real big reason to kill someone either. No, sir. They get drunk. Oh, they're real big drinkers, all of them. You know that. And bang, someone's lying in the gutter. Well, nobody's blaming them for it. That's the way they are, by nature. You know what I mean?
The kid in the film is played by John Savoca. His ethnicity is ambiguous, but the 1997 remake makes him explicitly Latino. Regardless, if the kid is white, his whiteness doesn't make a difference in the eyes of the juror, who just simply dismiss him as a slum kid. But there is still a clear racial undertone to the entire case. What stuck out to me during my rewatch is that even if the kid did kill his father, he was killing his abusive father, someone who had been beating on him since he was a kid and was not even at a certain point held competent enough to have custody of him. Clearly there needs to be consequences for this, but the electric chair? It is a sobering reminder that even if you are a victim, the legal system isn't built to protect you, and even if you are a victim of a crime, you are not going to automatically be seen as a sympathetic figure. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 12 Angry Men is a product of the McCarthyism era, where the US Senator Joseph McCarthy stoked fear of communism by making accusations against left-leaning political groups. Hollywood was a particular victim of these attacks because many figures were liberal and Jewish, while another equal amount were conservative and therefore looking to work within the system to take down these communists. People were brought in to testify if they were communists, and lives were often ruined without evidence, which of course means Ronald Reagan was 1,000% involved.
On that basis, we have exposed their lies when we came across them. We have been eminently successful in preventing them from their usual tactic of trying to run a majority of an organization with a well-organized minority.
Famously, there was the blacklisting of the Hollywood 10. These 10 individuals were cited in contempt of Congress and blacklisted after refusing to answer questions about their alleged involvement with the Communist Party of the United States of America. Many of these men and then many others had their lives ruined, their careers completely stymied, and people who did essentially snitch on them or put them into these predicaments were praised. Most notably is director Elia Kazan, who was considered a snitch for his actions during this time period.
Elia Kazan is a traitor.
Et parce qu'Elia Kazan est un traître.
He is a man who sold to McCarthy all of his companions
qui a vendu tous ses compagnons à McCarthy
at a time when he could continue to work in New York
à une époque où il
at
pouvait
high salary.
À une époque où il pouvait continuer à travailler à New York à un très haut salaire.
And having sold all of his people to McCarthy, he then made a film called On the Waterfront, which was a celebration of the informer.
Kazan is nothing more than a lowly stool pigeon of the McCarthy area. He'd rather have his own personal attributes on to his fancy cars and the hell with his fellow workers. He is a disgrace to the humankind.
Similarly to Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, plays like 12 Angry Men were used as courtroom dramas to highlight injustice, bigotry, and bias in the American legal system. In doing so, rather than purely legal facts, what it asks us to do is confront the biases that we bring into the system when we get enough power to actually manipulate it. Court trials being the subject of popularity and being turned into narratives is nothing new. We have had significant trials of the century since the 19th century. Authors have used public executions as inspirations for novels, poetry, and larger essays about social commentary and justice. What Rose did when he wrote 12 Angry Men was craft a new genre that would become important to television in particular. After the success of 12 Angry Men, Reginald Rose created The Defenders. Not those. The Defenders became one of TV's earliest examples of courtroom dramas. Today, such genres account for a substantial percentage of American television programming. Court dramas and shows highlighting the struggles of defense attorneys used to be a priority in this country. Shout out to Matlock. Shows like The Defenders were also fairly left-leaning in their politics, hiring writers that were using this platform to discuss the law and all of the nuances within it. But slowly those shows were replaced by shows about cops. You can watch skip intros, many videos about propaganda. A focus on cops and the prosecution in mainstream media meant watching the transformation of defense attorneys into these amoral, money-driven crooks rather than overworked people, and the goal was often to allow their clients to escape justice. If you've seen Law & Order SVU, you have seen this countless times.
Convicting an innocent man obviously reflects poorly on you as a police officer. Your job is to arrest guilty people, not innocent ones.
That's correct. But it doesn't always go that way. That's just the way it is.
Fundamentally, what narratives about trials show us is how telling a story is more important than the truth. The story lingers even when other things come to light. For example, originally this video was going to be an examination of the fact that people online still think Amanda Knox is guilty of killing her roommate, and many people still confuse her with Casey Anthony. With Amanda Knox in particular, the bitter pill is that despite DNA evidence proving that she was not even at the scene of the crime, the fact that she is weird, off-putting to some, and didn't show the right kind of emotions is enough for people. And originally I was going to do a video examining that, and it is still going to be up on my Patreon if you are interested. But following the verdict in the trial against Rick Chow, who was acquitted of killing a teenage black boy, and Carmelo Anthony being found guilty of murder in the death of Austin Metcalf, and subsequently being sentenced to 35 years in prison, I didn't just want to publish a video about two white women who were acquitted, but instead, with all the discussion about the trial and the sense of empathy, I found myself coming back to this movie in particular because of the figure of the kid. A teenage boy who is barely an adult being dehumanized and having the circumstances of his background be just as key to the idea of his innocence as the facts of the case. The way that the teenage boy in this film is dehumanized, the main reason that juror number 8 wants to move with empathy in this process is because of details that came out in trial about his family life. However, more so, people want to dismiss him because of those things and lock him up. Because being a slum kid is enough to make his life barely worth living.
I mean, they're born liars.
Only an ignorant man can believe that.
Now, listen.
Do you think you were born with a monopoly on the truth? I think certain things should be pointed out to this man.
But among the jurors is one of his peers, juror number 6, aka Oscar from The Odd Couple for those of us who know TV Land Ball. He doesn't speak up initially about the language that the other jurors are using around slum kids until later, and even then he has no initial inclination to be protective or introspective about the case. Not until he realizes that when they're talking about slum kids and how they can't ever be changed, they are fundamentally talking about him.
It's no secret children from slum backgrounds are potential menaces to society.
I've lived in a slum all my life.
Wait a minute.
Please, I've played in backyards that were filled with garbage. I mean, maybe you can still smell it on me.
And when they think that he initially changes his vote in favor of not guilty, they turn on him because they assume, oh, you must have sympathy for them because you're another slum kid.
You sit here, vote guilty like the rest of us, and some golden-voiced preacher starts tearing your poor heart out about some underprivileged kid just couldn't help becoming a murderer, and you change your vote. What made you change your vote?
He didn't change his vote. I did.
Now, this is a white film in terms of the cast, but I find it allows the characters to really be more authentically themselves, and when it comes down to it, this is the system, the American justice system at work. It wants 12 angry white men at the center of it, and through this I feel like we get a fuller critical look at white patriarchy than we do in the 1990s version, where in classic 90s the racist xenophobic white male character is turned into a black hotep to show that everyone can be biased. Through this we also get to see that for many who come from disenfranchised backgrounds, the goal is not only to escape or assimilate, but to transcend that. During both the Carmelo Anthony sentencing and the Rick Chow acquittal, people were wondering about what could have happened if black people were on the jury. Would there be a lesser sentence for Carmelo? Would Rick Chow have been held accountable for killing a black teenager with no evidence that he actually committed a crime? The sad, sobering thing is that the jury system in America is deeply imperfect, both because we lived in a biased system and also the biases that live in that system through legal loopholes. Unrepresentative juries not only exclude and marginalize communities of color, but they also produce wrongful convictions and unfair sentences that disproportionately burden black people and people of color. In the beginning of this country, black people were not allowed to serve on juries under the Constitution because they were not considered people. And even when that changed, the South did not enact anti-discrimination laws and used the all-white jury as another whip to keep black people in check, but especially young black men, at the expense of innocent young black boys.
In June of 1944, a 14-year-old boy was executed in the electric chair in South Carolina.
As Frank B. Sonborn, one of the funders of John Brown's 1859 raid on Harper's Ferry, said, "So customary had it become to convict any Negro upon a mere accusation that public opinion was loath to allow a fair trial to black suspects, and was too often tempted to take the law into its own hands. Finally, the state became a dealer in crime, profited by it so as to derive a net annual income from her prisoners. The Negroes lost faith in the integrity of courts and in the fairness of juries." So this is literally a centuries-old issue. And even today, part of how jury discrimination exists is how the pool of jurors is determined, which is usually through voter rolls. Voter rolls have been proven time and time again to systematically exclude black people, but it is still the primary way in which a jury pool is made. Following that, both the prosecution and defense can strike jurors based on what they want for the outlook of the jury case. Prosecutors will often use preliminary strikes to remove certain jurors based on race, but as long as they can prove that they didn't do it based on race, it cannot be used against them in the moment. That bias usually doesn't come up until decades after the case has happened. For example, the case of Curtis Flowers, an African-American man who was tried for the same murders 6 times by the same prosecutor in Mississippi.
For 30 years, the Supreme Court has been clear. You can't remove people from juries based on their race, but defense attorneys say that is exactly what happened in Curtis Flowers' 6 different trials. Now, the first 5 either were overturned or ended in a mistrial. Now the Supreme Court is weighing whether or not race was a factor in his 6th.
An injustice that only got rectified due to it being brought into the limelight through the works of investigative journalists on the podcast Into the Dark. They were able to uncover that the prosecutor, Montgomery County District Attorney Doug Evans, had used 41 of 42 challenges to exclude African Americans from the juries. And despite eventually being acquitted for these murders, Flowers still spent 22 years behind bars, and most of that on death row, all due to a prosecutor taking advantage and using legal loopholes in the justice system. All white and nearly all white jurors are less likely to hold prosecutors to their burden of proof, especially when a defendant is not white, because they apply a presumption of guilt rather than a presumption that the defendant is innocent. Research demonstrates that white jurors are more likely to view black defendants as cold-hearted, remorseless, and dangerous. They also tend to treat black defendants more punitively than white defendants. In contrast, racially representative jurors engage in more thoughtful and deliberative fact-finding process. Studies have found that they consider more factual information, are more likely to discuss missing evidence, and are more willing to discuss issues that are often overlooked by all white jurors, like racial profiling. These improvements are seen only when there is meaningful representation on the jury. Token diversity does not increase the quality of deliberations, because African Americans serving on white-dominated juries, especially when they are in a minority of one, are more vulnerable to the formidable pressure exerted by the majority. All of that is focused on the system, but also personal bias plays a big role in culturally who gets seen to be innocent. One of the major sins of the Clinton administration was the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act in 1994. It was and remains the largest crime legislation in U.S. history. The bill provided for 100,000 new police officers and $9.7 billion in funding for prisons which were designed with significant input from experienced police officers. The bill came after a rise in crime that began in the 60s and then rocked major metropolitan cities for an age. In an attempt to outlaw and order the Republicans, the Democrats leaned into a way to do law and order the right way. The platform encouraged states to pass truth in sentencing laws, bragged about instituting the death penalty for nearly 60 more crimes, and even encouraged the prosecution of young people as adults. This platform remained largely in place until 12 years later, when in 2008, the tone and substance began to change under new leadership in the party. Coincidentally, incarceration rates peaked in 2008. The right way to view the 1994 crime bill is as the moment when both parties at national level fully embraced the policies and political posturing that exacerbated the mass incarceral crisis that we are trying to fix today. Support for the bill was bipartisan, but it was also something that several Black mayors urged the Black Caucus to vote for. It is important to note that the Black Caucus wanted the legislation to have a provision in it that would address things like police brutality and give money into communities to actually help. Unfortunately, this caused some problems. The mayors indicated support for the measure, but they wrote that they did not believe that it should bring down the entire bill. We cannot afford to lose the opportunities this bill provides to the people of our cities. Staunchly supported by the Black Caucus and civil rights organizations, the measure is opposed with equal intensity by the National Association of District Attorneys and other law enforcement groups, which maintain it could undermine the death penalty. Eventually, the Black Caucus, led by Kiwase Mafume, decided to vote overall in favor of the bill. However, there were always major issues with what it was. There's no question that by the early 1990s, Blacks wanted an immediate response to the crime, violence, and drug markets in their communities. But even at the time, many were asking for something different from the crime bill. Calls for tough sentencing and police protection were paired with calls for full employment, quality education, and drug treatment and criticism of police brutality. It's not just that those demands were ignored completely, it is that some elements were elevated and others were diminished. What we call selective hearing. Policymakers pointed to Black support for greater punishment and surveillance without recognizing accompanying demands to redirect power and economic resources to low-income minority communities. When Blacks ask for better policing, legislators tend to hear more instead. Something that we saw come up during the Black Lives Matter protests when people were calling for abolishing the police with these things in regard, people completely ignoring them. This is why when people say like, oh, why isn't it not reform policing? Why is it abolish policing? Because they won't hear you if you say reform. And I do think it's important to recognize that being a Black doesn't inherently make you liberal or progressive. There will always be Black folks out there who believe that locking up the wrong kids will make things better for the right kids, even if it doesn't play out that way, because who decides who are the right kids and the wrong kids is often going to be in the hands of people who already see Black people as inherently violent. But lawmakers scrapped the Racial Justice Act when Republicans promised to filibuster any legislation that adopted its measures. They wanted strict carceral justice, and eventually Democratic leadership yielded to Republicans, demanding that prevention or welfare for criminals be sliced in exchange for their votes. That's why we are where we are, kids. So the compromise that they made eliminated $2.5 billion in social spending and only $8 million in prison expenditures. Yes, crime in this time period was terrible. And as people noted, no one knew that they had seen the worst of it. All they knew is that everything was doubling, it was increasing over the past 30 years, and there seemed to be no reversal of that trend in sight. However, it was ending.
The prediction was terrifying, and lawmakers cracked down on juvenile offenders.
This country went into a moral panic over super predators.
But there was one problem.
The calculations were wrong. They made it up.
So it wasn't that you shouldn't have been worried about serious crime, but they were never addressing the root of that crime. Right now, we are constantly being inoculated with that same element of propaganda, the fear of the other coming from all sides, being amplified by social media. Everyone has an opinion about a crime, a case, how it should have been prosecuted, who, what, where, and when, even if they have no legal background. Going back to 12 Angry Men, watching this film and listening to the way these men talk about this young boy reminded me so much about the language that you would see given to black and brown boys in the 80s and 90s, leading to the unjust incarceration of the exonerated Central Park Five, but also the way we talk about kids now, especially all of the fever around teen takeovers.
Teen takeovers started popping up in Chicago in 2022. This video from April of 2023 showing a trail of destruction left behind. Since then, the issue has continued to resurface.
Teen takeovers has become the new boogeyman, with teens on social media organizing hangouts because we often complain about things being expensive. There are no third spaces, and if you don't have money for summer camp or trips or even a trip to the movies, yeah, teenagers are going to want to find ways to socialize with other teenagers. And yes, there have been incidents of violence at some of these events. But those who study these events on a more sociological platform explain that they are not inherently violent. Thankfully, we do have some libraries, like the Brooklyn Public Library, using an opportunity to let kids have these public spaces and have them have teen takeovers in safe spaces.
Evidence doesn't really support the idea that teen takeovers should be characterized as violent events.
There have been arrests at teen takeovers on charges from disorderly conduct to gun possession.
The presence of a large group of teenagers can increase risk-taking and can escalate conflict among them.
But
it's not typical in most cities that they're actually being arrested for curfew violations.
For the majority of teens who perhaps just showed up because it was something to do, responding with police can have harmful effects on their mental health, or even escalate the situation.
There is a way to address these issues while not also demonizing teenagers, especially those in major cities, because they often end up being black. Because while similar things may happen in rural areas, they get treated as tragedies. But if they happen in Chicago, Detroit, they become what liberal voters voted for. The inherent lack of empathy doesn't do anything to address the root of systemic issues. And empathy, to me, is at the core of 12 Angry Men. And I think it's important in this case that we are seeing 12 white men deal with their lack of empathy towards the marginalized people around them.
Has anybody here any idea how long it would take an elf? This isn't a game.
I love this movie deeply. It's the reason why I keep up to date with my voter information. It's why I'm always willing and able to do jury duty. The last time I got asked to be part of jury duty, I got far into the process, but because the incident took place near Brooklyn College and I was about to attend Brooklyn College, I could not be on the jury. That was over 10 years ago, and I have not been asked since. My mom has been on a grand jury, and I remember being so excited and talking to her about it being her civic responsibility. Like, this is important. Like, there's an entire monologue by one of the jurors in the film, and I was like, oh, this definitely imprinted in my mind.
Responsibility. This I have always thought is a remarkable thing about democracy, that to come down to this place to decide on the guilt or innocence of a man we have never heard of before. We have nothing to gain or lose by our verdict. This is one of the reasons why we are strong.
And this movie fundamentally makes me want to be empathetic in positions of power whenever I may have any power. It's the reason why, as much as I enjoy SVU, it's also fucking exhausting because it's so anti-defense attorney. It's so in love with its own superiority that it can just be so annoying and frustrating. As I've been reflecting on the Rick Chow sentencing and Carmelo Anthony's sentencing and all of the rhetoric that I'm seeing on TikTok, which is, first of all, the worst place to see some of this stuff, because there are people who are just so violently carceral and so anti-empathetic in every regard. And it just constantly reminds me that people look to the justice system in this country, all over the world, to be this arbitrator of goodness and to restore a sense of justice that just does not exist within a system that gets it so wrong so often. That regardless of how things work, the fact that Carmelo Anthony's jury with no black people is alarming. The fact that Rick Chow got acquitted of murdering a black teenager that he thought was shoplifting him, but there was no shoplifting, is such a violent betrayal by this system that of course people are angry. And when it is tied with a case of a teenage boy who did end up ending the life of another boy in an altercation, to see one case be seen as stand your ground and the other one not, no matter how you want to break the details of it, it just reinforces the violence. The idea that black teenagers, black boys, black children are dehumanized, and it pairs in with the history of this country and the ways in which we are constantly treated by a different tiered system. Because how many times do we see non-black people stand their ground and operate in violence against our bodies because we are seen as violent and we are seen as inherently aggressive, and they can get away with it, right? But when it's the reverse and we are threatened by white kids jumping us, it's like, oh my gosh, you did too much. I'm not going to get into the legal minutia, because the legal minutia doesn't help, because we live in a racist society. We live in a flawed society. And again, even if you are a victim of violent crime, if you're a victim of domestic violence, if you're a victim of any kind of rape, sexual assault, it does not mean the system will help you. And oftentimes, even when we as black people are looking for the justice system to get justice for us, we have seen time and time again, nothing happen. Like, the LAPD killed a black woman's dog. They killed a dog. Nothing. A 1-year-old gets killed. Nothing. The reason why I focused it on 12 Angry Men is because, one, this way algorithmically it'll be a good hook. But I did go back and watch this movie, and it did remind me of how, even as someone who is not a carceral person, who believes in reform, who believes in these things, but also knows that we live in a system and we have to do our part. Part of doing our part is that when we show up in these situations where we have the power over somebody else's life, that we move with empathy, that we recognize that we are imperfect, people, and that we have the ability to be wrong, and that we should be addressing our biases. We should be paying attention. It's so interesting how, like, the people on the jury are like playing games or yawning, and they're so lack of interested, and they're just so angry to be there because it's not a lot of money. I know saying it's your civic responsibility is corny. I know that. But it is. If you have the ability to be on a jury and be in any kind of situation, be there, be present, because that's one of the few places where we have power to actually make a change for anybody, and we should bring that forward. And just recently in New York, we're celebrating the Knicks win, but also Mayor Mamdani went to Rikers to go to a commencement for these juveniles who were graduating high school in this detention center, and reminding them that their lives are not over, that they have the ability to make changes even within this opportunity. And that, to me, is the kind of empathy that, if we're going to say that we want to break the system and we want to improve change, we have to move with that, with the humility of knowing that lives are complicated, things are complicated, and we should do better. And if you haven't seen 12 Angry Men, highly recommend.
Many of you arrived on Rikers in a cloud of uncertainty and despair. The future felt very grim indeed. And yet you did not surrender to that alienation. You were never overcome by the adversity that lay before you. Instead, you chose to continue moving forward.
I know it's corny, but I believe in my civic responsibility, and my responsibility, if I'm going to make content, to also meet the moment when I can. And so this month ended up being a little bit more serious than I planned to be, but next month we'll get into the Avatar: The Last Airbender brain rot, Team Zutara, and I look forward to seeing you then. But we have one more video coming out this month, a little bit more serious again, but next month, Avatar brain rot, because I got a lot to say. And I think one day, will I ever be done with talking about Avatar and the brain rot? But no, because it's rotten to the core, to quote Descendants. It's rotten to the motherfucking core.